Hi everybody. Today, as part of my end of the year wrap-up content, I am here to wrap up all of the nonfiction books that have been on my TBR throughout this year, some which I'm going to be reading this month once I finish completing Christmas books, and most which I've read throughout the rest of the year. The first book I wanted to talk about was Brooke Shields Is Not Allowed to Get Old. This book was released in January. I first listened to it on audiobook when it first came out, and I loved hearing Brooke Shields tell me about her life. For those of you who do not remember, she was on the Super Bowl episode of Friends where she played Joey's stalker, Erica, and she recalls an event from behind the scenes of that episode where she skidded across the carpet and looked up Matthew Perry's pant leg. So Brooke Shields is 10 years older than me, so I can apply some of the advice that she talks about to my own life, but most of it is about dealing with menopause and postpartum depression, which I have never experienced. So I just wanted to say before I get into the rest of these reviews that it is really hard for me to rate another person's life story, so I try to subjectively rate all of these memoirs the best that I can. But this gets, so most, all of these memoirs get between 4 and 5 stars. The next memoir is one I just read parts of for NonFiction November last month, and it's called Directed by James Burrows. This memoir is by the man who directed many shows that you all will be familiar with, no matter which decade you grew up in, because he has been directing TV shows since the 70s. So the shows that Matt and I are watching, besides Friends, that James Burrows directed are Will and Grace, Cheers, and that's it. Oh, and we're going to be watching Mary Tyler Moore, one episode of Mary Tyler Moore next month. So I really loved all of the behind-the-scenes aspects of this book, of all of the TV shows that I love, including Friends, of course. 5 stars. Oops. The next 2 memoirs that I read are by Lauren Graham, who plays Lorelai Gilmore on Gilmore Girls. She was also in Parenthood, which came out in 2010, and she was also in Because I Said So with Diane Keaton, Piper Perabo, and Mandy Moore. That came out in 2009. And Birds of America with Matthew Perry, which came out, I believe, in like 2005. So the thing about Birds of America that I don't understand is where the title comes from. So if you have also seen that movie, please explain that to me. So in her first memoir, Talking as Fast as I Can, which I have read twice this year, most recently in November, for NonFiction November, she talks about growing up, getting into acting, landing the role of Lorelai on Gilmore Girls, her experiences on Gilmore Girls, Parenthood, and Gilmore Girls A Year in the Life. And then the thing that I liked best about this book was the behind-the-scenes aspects of the making of Gilmore Girls, especially when she talked about the costumes. I'm really into what the characters wore, and my favorite season of clothes from her is season 3, probably. If you would like commentary on my favorite outfits from Friends, please watch the 3-part series on my YouTube channel where I talk about the outfits of Phoebe, Monica, and Rachel and rate the episodes. So this book was 5 stars. Lauren Graham's second memoir, Have I Told You This Already? Is just a series of essays that are unrelated to being on a TV show. she writes these essays with a lot of humor. And my favorite ones were Ryan Gosling cannot confirm. Old Lady Jackson takes you to dinner at 5 p.m. and squirrel signs. The next nonfiction book that I read this year, which apparently still has a bookmark in it, even though I read it a couple months ago. I may read it again at the end of the month once I'm done reading Christmas books, though, so who knows. So this book is called Mean Baby. It's by Selma Blair. Now, Selma Blair was on the episode of Friends, the one with the Christmas in Tulsa, where Chandler gets shipped off to work in Tulsa, Oklahoma for Christmas time. And Selma Blair plays Wendy, who is his coworker at his job in Oklahoma, who we see flirting with her when he's on the phone with Monica. Basically, she wants to have an affair with Chandler, but Chandler says no. And Matthew Perry actually fought against this plot line of Chandler cheating on Monica, although I think that was more related about in London, or meeting somebody on a plane to London and cheating on Monica with him, even though they weren't dating it or something. I feel like I read that in James Burrows' book or heard it somewhere else. But Selma Blair is more well known for her roles as on Dawson's Creek, which I have not watched yet, and my favorite movie, Legally Blonde, with Reese Witherspoon, where she plays the villain, Vivian Kensington, who, honestly, I think Vivian Kensington is one of the most misunderstood movie villains ever created, and I wrote a fan fiction about that, like 5 years ago, after I saw Legally Blonde, a musical at the Boys and Girls Club of Sohegan Valley, where my friend Megan Hammis played the role of Vivian Kensington. Selma Blair is also a disability rights activist because she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, the same disability that Christina Applegate, who played Amy Green, Rachel's younger sister on Friends, and she talks about her diagnosis and how she deals with her disability in her day-to-day life. And as somebody who is a disability rights activist, I not only enjoyed her behind-the-scenes reflections of Legally Blonde and Dawson's Creek, but also telling her story about her disability. 5 stars. This next nonfiction book I'm going to be talking about today is called I'll Be There For You by Kelsey Miller. This is another book I will be rereading again at the end of this month once I finish reading all of the holiday books. So this book is written by a woman named Kelsey Miller, and she did a lot of research into the behind the scenes making of Friends, and some of the material in this book crosses over with stuff that is mentioned in directed by James Burrows. So if you wanted to read this book, it might be a good idea to read directed by James Burrows at the same time, so you can see where there is overlap with this woman's commentary. So again, I love the behind the scenes commentary about how the episodes were made and everything. Another nonfiction book I actually am reading right now that is currently on my TBR that is about the making of a movie that a French star was in is called Your Favorite Scary Movie by Ashley Cullens, which was recommended to me by Kayla at Books and Lala. This is a nonfiction book about the making of the Scream movies and all of behind-the-scenes interviews with the member of the cast. For those of you who have never seen Scream, Courtney Cox plays the newscaster, Gail Werthers, And her husband at the time of the filming of the movies, David Arquette, also stars in this movie as the older brother of the main character, Sidney Prescott. Or no, I think she's actually the older brother of her best friend, who's played by Drew Barrymore. So I have only seen the first Scream movie, and I was actually pretty underwhelmed by it. I found that the plot was pretty predictable because, I mean, if you have seen the movie before, you will have seen that the villains are pretty much shown to us at the earlier parts of the movie because they are prankster students who threaten to get expelled, but obviously if they got expelled there would be no movie plot. So a horror book that I have read that frames around final girls from horror movies is called The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. And the main character in this book, I pictured Sidney Prescott as like somebody in her 40s or 50s who's going to therapy to deal with her. And obviously, your favorite scary movie goes into the film, the backstage makings of the rest of the movies. And because I was so underwhelmed by the first Scream movie, I don't think I'm going to see the rest of the movies unless people can convince me in the comments to watch the rest of the series before Scream 7 comes out. I definitely won't be able to. Scream 7 is coming out at the beginning of February. If you can convince me to watch the other movies that follow the first one, I don't think I will be able to watch them before the next movie comes out in February. I just didn't find it to be that scary. So I'm not going to talk about this next book for too long because I have reviewed it more than one time on YouTube. But of course, the next nonfiction book I read this year was Matthew Perry's memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. As I said, I have read this book before and reviewed it previous times on YouTube and more recently on a written review blog. So if you want to see my thoughts on this book, please go back and watch my other videos because I would just be repetitive in saying how I feel about this book. What I will say is that I read an article yesterday when I got home from the gym about how Matthew Perry's doctor was sentenced to 30 months in prison for killing him. And I really think his family got the justice that they deserved with that sentence because what he did was horrible. And I'm really glad that the doctor lost his medical license because he doesn't deserve to give other people medical advice after what he did to Matthew Perry. The next nonfiction book is this tiny little book. So the story behind this book is that one of the people who runs the Matthew Perry Memorial Facebook pages that I'm on interviewed everybody on the Facebook page about the impact that Matthew Perry has had on them. But the interviews with the people from the Facebook group don't really come until the end of the book. Most of this book talks about this woman, Darlene, who interviewed all of the people on a Facebook page, including myself. I have commentary at the very end of the book about how Matthew Perry's death impacted her and also how she deals with the grief of losing her husband at the same time because her husband died the year before Matthew Perry, and I guess she talks about how Matthew Perry is looking out over her and telling her that her husband is okay. So, I mean, I have not rated this book yet, but, I mean, obviously, since I have commentary in it, I would give it 5 stars. The next book that I read for the Manhattan to Stars Hollow TBR for nonfiction is Theater Kid by Jeffrey Seller. This is the memoir of the person who grew up to become a producer for Avenue Q, A Chorus Line, Rent, and Hamilton, and Evita. So my mother-in-law Sally gave me this book as a present earlier this spring. It's one of my favorite memoirs because, as you all know, I love musical theater, and A Chorus Line is one of my favorite plays. So, of course, this gets 5 stars, too. And this provides a nice segue into my next book, which is The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. So, this is the memoir of the actress who played Emily Gilmore on Gilmore Girls, who is the mother of Lorelai and the grandmother of Rory. She has some good moments in this. So far in Gilmore Girls, I am at the beginning of season 4. You can tell that Emily and Richard are basically viewing Rory as a second Lorelai and giving all the experience to her that Lorelai didn't get because she had Rory when she was 16. And I compare how Emily treats Lorelai to how Judy Geller treats Monica and Friends. I think the amount of abuse that both of these mothers show towards their daughters is about the same. Do I like Emily more than Judy? Kind of. Scenes that really got me emotional between with Emily and them are this scene where Emily and Lorelai are doing the fashion show for Chilton in season 2 when they're wearing the red matching jackets. That was a happy moment. I love seeing them bond. I didn't like the episode where they went to the spa together for the weekend because Emily basically manipulated her into going. Emily Gilmore is a very manipulative character, and I do not really like her very much for that reason. The other gut punch of a scene is the one where Richard has his heart attack in season 1, and she's freaking out because she doesn't want to be the person to die second, so she says, "You have to let me die first." And Richard says, "Yes, I promise, you can go first, Emily." But if you have seen Gilmore Girls and the spin-off series all the way through a Gilmore Girls of Year in the Life, you will see that Richard does die. So I'm not even there yet. I'm still on season 4. But when I get to the part where Richard dies, I know that I'm going to cry. So for those of you who grew up in the 80s, you will remember that Kelly Bishop plays Baby's mom in Dirty Dancing, and she was also on Broadway in the original cast of A Chorus Line, and she played Sheila, the lead singer in the At the Ballet song. 5 stars because she talks about her experiences on Broadway and how her character of Sheila connected to her life personally, because in the song At the Ballet, for those of you not familiar with the chorus line, it's about three girls who are in this ensemble who are auditioning for this off-Broadway play, or Broadway play, and they kind of have abusive fathers. And Kelly Bishop says how she was able to connect her actual life into playing that character, which is actually really sad. That almost got me to cry. The final book on this nonfiction wrap-up for Manhattan to Stars Hollow TBR is We Were Jaguars, a memoir of my people by Namonte Nanquimo. This was the Reese's Book Club pick for November 2024. And it is about a Native American woman who is from the Ecuadorian rainforest named Namonte Nanquimo, and she talks about how white people took over her land to build schools and houses, and like it was really interesting. I don't read a lot of memoirs about Native Americans, so I really liked this book. And I mean, I picked it for the TBR because it was a Reese's book club pick, and Reese Witherspoon was on Friends as Rachel's sister Jill, who appears in 2 episodes, I believe, in season 7 or season 8. I think it's season 8, actually. The one with Rachel's other sister, and I forget the name of the episode where she dates Ross for a little bit. But yeah, as I said at the beginning of the video, it is hard for me to give star ratings to stories about other people's lives, but objectively speaking, all of these memoirs get 4 to 5 stars. Thank you for tuning in. Have a nice day.